Most men don't even realize they're being tested with a woman until their confidence is already taken a hit and they're confused at what to do next. Sometimes you'll think you're just having an innocent conversation, but you're actually being silently judged and set up for failure if you don't know how to handle the situation. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the traps that women set and how to navigate them better as a man so that you can maintain an attractive aura of strength and confidence instead of having to walk away feeling frustrated and defeated once again. So diving into this, at this point, I have dealt with every type of girl that you can imagine. I've dated the traditional ultra feminine and quiet type of girls all the way to the combative girls that will just test you nonstop. And off the bat, I definitely don't recommend dealing with the type of girl that is just throwing tests after test at you all the time. And there's many reasons for that, but a simple one is just because it's not worth the hassle and she doesn't respect you. But what you'll notice as you go along and date a variety of women is that women will vary their level of testing with you. Some of them are worse than others, but given enough time with a woman, they will all test you. So if you're one of those guys that says, you know, I'm not dealing with a girl if she tests me, well, I've got some bad news. They all will, no matter how submissive and feminine they are. Just give it enough time because they are wired to do it. The types of confidence tests that I'm talking about here are not always done as a premeditated plan or part of some master ploy. It's more so something that they are subconsciously compelled to do for investment and safety reasons, and I'll expand more on what I mean by that as I go along. But it's important to understand that the degree of a woman's test depends on how much respect she has for you. If she has little respect for you, she's gonna just straight up burn you alive with test after test. But if a girl has a lot of respect for you, it'll be more occasional, or the tests will be more mild and weak in their intensity. Just don't expect to never get any because that's not realistic either. Now, one of the most common ways women will test your confidence is by taking little shots at you, downplaying something about you, or trying to knock you down a notch in general. And these can be sneaky in the sense that some guys can easily overlook tests like this. For example, a while ago I met up with this girl that I was talking to on Instagram, and I'd never met her before, and we'd exchanged probably 4 or 5 messages max before the date, so I didn't have a deeper read on her personality just yet. But from the brief conversation we did have, she had this sweet, like, innocent vibe to her, and her photos on her profile were like that too. But once I met her, I could immediately detect that there was a bit more to her than just that. She gave me a vibe of a girl who actually probably isn't so innocent and knows the dating game well herself, almost like a female player of sorts. She had a vibe of being savvy in that way. So in my head, I was like, all right, there's gonna be an element of playing chess with this one. She was a fitting opponent. No, I'm kidding. I didn't come to spar with this girl and engage in a bunch of games. It was more so that I could just tell that she was a bit more savvy than your average girl. So anyway, we get into the conversation and things are flowing well, and we bounced to a few different places throughout the night. Now, eventually we're waiting in line at this bar, and she decided to throw a little jab or confidence test my way. We were talking about our past growing up, and I told her how when I was a teenager, I didn't do a lot of partying until later, and I was a bit of a late bloomer that way. So she smiled and she goes, "Oh, so you're actually just a good little boy then." And she kind of looked away with this smirk on her face, like she just stung me in a way. And there's 2 confidence tests going on in a statement like that. The first part is when she said, "You're actually just a good little boy then." That word "actually" is key because she's insinuating that I'm putting on an act of being one way, but I'm actually not what I portray. The other part is that she's belittling me, or attempting to, with the little boy aspect of that sentence. And the other implication there is that I'm more submissive instead of masculine or dominant. Now, it's key to understand that there's a variety of responses you could give to something like this. But in the moment, I doubled down and I said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, absolutely. I make sure I'm tucked in bed by 7 every night, and I'm actually still a virgin too." And when I responded like that, she laughed and she looked at me shaking her head like, "You dick," you know, because her little jab had fallen flat and she knew it. By rolling with it, I took the steam out of it, and it also showed that my confidence in myself wouldn't waver just from something like that. Now, someone might still be wondering, wasn't that just innocent banter on her part? Like, what's wrong with that? Or how is that a confidence test? And the answer is that yes, on the surface, it can look like innocent banter, but it's only banter if you respond correctly. If you give a reactive response or you hesitate, it becomes a failed confidence test on your part. You can't overlook these situations as being insignificant because they add up and they can reveal characteristics about you that are attractive or unattractive. For example, imagine that you made a playful jab at a friend of yours and he overreacted with anger and he got upset. You'd just be like, all right, this dude is overly sensitive. Even though your joke wasn't intended to try and tear the guy down, his reaction still revealed a weakness about him. And this is how these sneaky comments from women can work sometimes. They usually aren't some sinister ploy, although some girls will try to actively hit you with certain comments. But if you react badly or you freeze, it'll give off a vibe that you're unsure of yourself or you don't react well to pressure, whether that pressure is big or small, and that indicates an overall lack of strength. Remember that testing your strength is actually a smart move in a way from a woman's standpoint because it helps her make a better investment. A weak man is a bad investment for a woman, so she has to test if you're authentic or not in some way or another. There's guys out there putting on a front to beautiful women every day to try and sleep with them, so keep that in mind. The key is to learn how to handle these tests like a pro, and there's different tools for different scenarios. It's like a boxer. Sometimes you'll block the punch and other times you'll slip the punch and hit the guy with a counter strike, etc. There's a lot of ways that a boxer can deal with an incoming attack, and handling sneaky confidence tests is the same thing essentially. Now, another girl I was talking to was really feisty with the testing at first. I mean, way more than most girls you'd meet. But with her specifically, I was like, I want to see what happens here if I just keep smashing through all of her tests over and over again. And her main thing was throwing troll comments at random times. Like, I remember at one point she was looking at a picture of me early on and I was wearing jeans in the pictures, so in reality you couldn't actually see much of my legs. But she goes, "Oh nice, I love how you have chicken legs." And that honestly cracked me up in my head. But again, I went with a similar tactic of rolling with it. And I said something to the effect of, "Yeah, tell me about it. All these years of squatting and all I have to show for it is a big ass." Again, I decided to go with a response that would take the steam out of her jab. And it was interesting because that girl specifically became so submissive to me over time that she would basically do anything I wanted, and the testing just went out the window completely. At the time, it was an interesting experiment to see how certain confidence tests can look hostile on the surface, but the girl is actually becoming more attracted beneath the surface as you shrug them off. And she was easily one of the highest interest girls that I've ever dealt with to this day. And it started with a layer of confidence tests and jabs. And I'm not saying to go after girls that throw out that degree of testing, but the point I want to get across is that you need to develop the ability to calibrate the correct response to use in the moment, and never ever let her get you defensive or trying to explain yourself, because that is a big display of weakness, even in a seemingly minor situation. If she gets you explaining yourself, you're dead. And again, there are multiple ways to handle these tests, but women will sometimes poke at your confidence by downplaying the things that you do, making it seem like those things are insignificant or childish, or like you're beneath her in some way. And sometimes these comments could be really malicious, and in that case, just get rid of the girl. But more commonly, these may look like teases that aren't aimed to manipulate you or be ultra evil or anything. But if you respond poorly, it will show insecurity and a lack of confidence. For instance, if I had told the first girl, "Did you just call me a little boy? Like, who are you talking to like that? I'm a grown man." Or with the second girl, said something like, "Chicken legs? I actually work out a lot. Look at these other photos of my legs." It would just look like this sad, lame defense trying to prove my masculinity because I'm not comfortable with who I am. Or if I froze up or hesitated even for a second with either girl, it would look like they threw me off and shook me up to where I was overly affected by their comment, which again projects insecurity and weakness. Remember, women only respect strength, nothing else. I cannot stress this enough. Their level of respect always stems from your level of strength. And this next one will really test your strength, because this next one can really shake guys up emotionally and throw off your confidence if you're not careful. It's something often mentioned in passing, but a lot of guys can get pissed or just not know what to say back when it comes up. And that is when women mention other guys as a way to flex her value. Women oftentimes have a misconception that mentioning other guys will somehow make her seem more valuable, like you'll want to fight for her more since you have competition. And sometimes they'll encounter simps that will just reinforce this because they actually will fight for those girls. But little do most of them understand that it's just a turnoff, but they'll do this anyway if they're feeling insecure, unsure about where you stand with them, or they're trying to flip the power dynamic. So to give you another example of this, I was on a date with a girl from a dating app, so it was my first time meeting her. And this girl was a solid 8.5 to a 9, I'd say. She looked good and she knew it. So right away, I knew there was going to be an element of ego at some point in some way or another. It's just what comes with these girls most of the time. Some of them are surprisingly sweet and chill, but most have some degree of ego to them when they're that attractive. So she asked me some question about what I was looking for overall in terms of dating, something along those lines. And I responded with more of a vague statement, and I didn't ask her the same question back. But in response to my statement, she decided to go on anyway about what she was looking for. And then she made a comment about how she's looking for a guy that has more depth to his personality because she's dated top 1% men in the past and there isn't much to their personality beyond just looking good and having money. And yeah, she literally used the phrase top 1% man, which had me like, are you watching like men's dating content or something? Like, that's not a phrase that you hear women use often, if ever. But anyway, she went out of her way to try and flex the fact that she was in demand by high quality guys, supposedly. And for a lot of guys, that would have put them in a mode to try and prove themselves as worthy to her or better than the other guys. Many guys would see that as a challenge, like, all right, I have to outshine all these other guys in order to stand out and get her. But that is the exact trap that you want to avoid. Another similar one is when you're dating a girl and she mentions being hit on at work or while she was out, with friends, something like that. Also keep in mind that sometimes these stories can be complete lies too. But overall, it's a test designed to get an emotional response out of you and test how confident you are in yourself. The best way to handle these is to do the exact opposite, like nothing ever happened. Almost like she had never said anything in the first place. Because that type of non-reactive response is like depriving a fire of oxygen. If the fire doesn't get the oxygen it needs to keep burning, the flame will burn out. But if you do give her that oxygen in the form of an emotional response, she will know that's a weak point and she can come back to it later again if she wants a response out of you. And on some level, it signals that you may not be the best option for her because you aren't confident in your ability to keep her, which can also be interpreted as having a lack of options yourself. Also, one thing I want to address before I go on is that women themselves will often say things like, tests like this are games that only immature women play. And there's an element of truth to that, but many of those same women will also act like they'd never do any of these things themselves and that you're just crazy for thinking good women act like this and test men. But you have to be aware of the blind spot that women often have with themselves. They will often say they'd never do the exact thing that they do all the time. So really keep that in mind, that both quote unquote good women and bad women will test you. And again, these aren't necessarily premeditated conscious ploys all the time that they just sit around thinking about doing to you. A lot of the time, it's just simply done off impulse and emotion, just like this next one, which you will run into many times over. It's important to understand that women have multiple ways to try and flex their value and throw you off course to leverage the power dynamic. And they can do this in a variety of subtle ways that can be confusing if you don't know the signs, and oftentimes they aren't even consciously aware that they're doing these things. A more classic way of doing this is just acting uninterested, which can appear in a few sneaky ways. The first is the one that you've likely experienced, and that's the pullback. This is a pretty obvious one at this point, so I won't spend too much time on this, but in a nutshell, you might have a great date with a girl and then she just vanishes afterward and you're left wondering, what did I do wrong or what happened exactly? The purpose of the pullback is to gauge where your interest lies or shift the power dynamic in a way that makes you chase her and not her chasing you. And honestly, the pullback it's kind of a useful test for them, truthfully, because it can help expose guys that are clingy or desperate, which could also potentially threaten their safety if the guy is really off the hinges in some cases. So again, it's one of those things that can be annoying to deal with on the guy side, but there is some utility or usefulness in it for a woman. You just have to know how to navigate it as a guy rather than get pissed off about it. It's one of the easier tests to handle, honestly. But a more crafty way that women show disinterest that can really undermine your confidence is by acting uninterested while they are with you. And this can manifest in a bunch of different ways, but some of the ways this can appear is things like a woman acting like she's bored with you or seeming like she's distant in conversation, or short responses that kind of dead end the conversation, or when you're texting her, slow, drawn out responses. And another one that you might run into is keeping physical distance between you while she's on a date, even though she's into you, or rejecting you in some way to see how you respond to it. Some women may also flake a date or reschedule just to gauge your response to it. The whole idea of acting uninterested can range from being minor and petty to wildly disrespectful. So it's important to be able to gauge where the test is at on that scale. It's also important to be able to read the room and understand when a girl is legitimately not interested in you. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that the woman who is doing these things is actually interested in you and simply testing your confidence, which will happen at some point with certain women. The important thing with these types of tests is to stay grounded and not overanalyze her behavior. If you let her dictate the interaction, you're giving up your power and it comes off as a lack of confidence in yourself. The better move is to simply remain firm in who you are and have boundaries and checkpoints set up in your mind to automatically filter out certain tests. So for example, if a girl wants to intentionally flake the first date with me to test me, the only thing she's getting back is no reply. And if a girl is seeming uninterested in checking her phone on a date, the only thing that she's getting back from me is me leaving. You have to have a point where certain tests just results in a loss of attention from you, because that is the ultimate display of confidence. But let's say that you're in a situation where the test isn't as disrespectful as that and it's more like she's playing hard to get. A common one like this is a girl acting unimpressed by your accomplishments or achievements or maybe a story you told her, and it can really mess with a guy's head in some cases. It's a type of situation where she isn't being outright disrespectful or hateful towards you. She's just not giving an impressed response like you had expected or hoped for. In those scenarios, it's about matching her energy back. If she's unfazed by you, you're also unfazed by her lack of response. The frame you want to have is that you're just having a great time regardless of what her response is, because that's what's attractive. It's attractive to her not because you're playing a game or putting on an act, but because she can feel that you can't be moved off center and that you have a sense of pride and self-respect that can't be shaken by someone else. Which takes us right back to her interpreting that as a signal of strength, which is a sign of good investment for her. Now, if you think that some of these tests can be pretty toxic in some cases, you're definitely right. But trust me, you haven't seen how toxic things can really get. So make sure to watch this video next, where I react to some of the most toxic dating advice that women give each other, so you can spot their toxic games ahead of time and avoid those women like the plague.